Welcome to the Team Engagement Podcast, where leaders of teams share their insights. Brought to you by Blue Sky Business Consulting. We discuss 5 questions in about 15 minutes. Hello and welcome again, everybody, to the Team Engagement Podcast, where leaders of teams share their insights. I'm very excited to welcome Lis Anderson. She is the founder and director of Ambitious, and she is all the way from Bristol, England. So I'm very excited to have her on the podcast, especially from England, because I love England. Even though I've never been there, I just love the English culture and English people. So Lis, thank you so much for taking time to join me on the podcast today. What would you like the people to know about Ambitious and some of the other projects that you're working on?
Great. Yeah. So we are a PR comms business based in the creative hub that is Bristol in the UK. So we work with corporates and B2B clients, covering strategic comms, sort of PR, social media, and quite a lot of content. And we work with clients nationally and sort of globally. And so that keeps us on our sort of toes, helping them promote their products, services, protecting their reputations. And yeah, that sort of keeps us busy.
Very good. Now you have a podcast as well, from what I understand. So tell us just a little bit about that.
Yeah, so we've also our own podcast. So we work a lot with sort of founders and owners of businesses. So we have a podcast called Thoughtful Leadership, which is a take on leaders and CEOs kind of approach within sort of businesses and their approach to kind of leadership in maybe a more thoughtful way.
Very good. All right. Well, let's go ahead and get started with our questions. Now, Lis, I'm sure that you've run into this from time to time as you're working with clients, but sometimes teams or a company, they kind of fall into a lull with their energy levels and whatnot. What can leaders do to help infuse energy back into their teams?
Certainly, and maybe kind of you would expect me to say this from a comms perspective, but one of the first things that certainly kind of we sort of experience quite a lot with sort of clients is that the communication just isn't there. And so we would very much kind of encourage a communications first approach. So that is around clarity, frequency. It's not often that sort of complicated just to sort of re-engage and be really clear to the team on the why. Quite often you see a lot of kind of disengagement because people just don't understand what they're aiming for. What's his goal, what's the purpose and their role within that. So very much kind of that communication first sort of approach. The other thing that I kind of have sort of experienced for myself is really important around celebrating the small wins. And as a business owner, that's certainly something that kind of I sort of see. One of the things, for example, that we've introduced into our business is a spot bonus program where anybody in the team can nominate their colleague for a £50, £100 sort of meal out for going above and beyond. And that is by far kind of our most popular sort of program, and people love rewarding and celebrating those small wins. And then the other thing that I would say that we've also introduced is around kind of the changing the format to your communication changes the energy. We're fortunate to live in a brilliant, lovely part of the world. So if we're around trying to kind of engage the team, we go out for sort of meeting walks. We might do an offsite session, sometimes just changing the location to communicate a message or have an important meeting or something like that. A change of location certainly can kind of make a big difference. And then I think, sort of finally on that, I'd just say sort of really make sure that you're sort of creating space for voice and ownership, because that's really when teams sort of come together and feel as though they have a part to play in kind of what you're trying to do, and give them the opportunity to have a say and shape. Don't sort of be a stranger and do that kind of on your own when you've got a team to do that.
Great tips. I really like those, especially about kind of that change of location. Sometimes it's good to just get out of the office a little bit and meet somewhere else. And you're right. You're fortunate to be in a beautiful area. And I know here in the States, there are often places where people can go that are relatively close. Maybe it's a park or somewhere else we can kind of connect with nature a little bit. I love that idea. I think that's a great one.
Well,
all right. Look, yeah, it does. Obviously, you're having success with it, and that's what matters. Well, question number 2, how do you promote learning within your company?
So we take learning really seriously, and we invest certainly quite a lot of funds in that sort of first and foremost. Sorry, but I think there's two sort of important things there. One is around whilst we might be looking to future-proof the business, our narrative is always around encouraging others and our team to future-proof themselves in terms of skills coming down the line. So, for example, we're investing quite a lot in AI integration. That's really important for our business, but it's also really important for the whole of the team involved. Certainly kind of those guys that are in their 20s, 30s, they've got another 30 years to go for their career. So that narrative for us is always around stressing the importance around sort of learning. Maybe you'd expect that sort of from our tape, but we often use sort of disc profiling, which is sort of like the colour that might not be for everybody, but we found that to be a game changer in our organisation, which is around know yourself better, know others, and then kind of how you can learn and take an approach that suits you sort of better with that. And then we have a real approach around kind of micro learning. So certainly from a business owner perspective, we're a small business. We don't always have big budgets. And so breaking that out and having opportunities to do micro learning. So that might be sort of different events. So go out and build your network or build your confidence for the junior team, or do something that might be online. So it's very much kind of an ongoing process, but you don't always have to have the big budgets to be able to deliver hungry and curious minds to always be learning, because it's a really important part. And I think, kind of that applies to everybody in the business. And I'm a real advocate and kind of champion that myself. I really enjoy learning, and I make sure that I share that with the team from a leadership perspective too.
Yeah, I really like that. And I especially appreciate that you mentioned you don't have to be budgeting a lot of money in order to promote learning. You can do smaller, simple things, and they can be about the individual themselves, kind of that self-awareness that you were talking about. I really like those ideas. I think those are very helpful and simple, inexpensive ways to promote learning. I love that.
Yeah.
Question number 3, share one tip for effective delegation.
Yeah, so I get this at quite a bit of thought. I think it's really important to communicate the context, and being a communicator, and we help our clients do this sort of quite a lot, but people do better if they know why it matters. And so if that is around kind of, I don't know, improving a particular skill within the team or doing a task that needs priority, if you understand kind of the outcome of your actions, you're going to kind of input more. So I think kind of the context, communicating the context is a really important part. It's not just around kind of the task, it's around the impact that you're going to have as an individual. And I think we can all be better communicators in our businesses to help people come on board with our journeys.
I love that. And you mentioned the word communication several times there, which leads in very nicely to our next question. Question number 4. Now, Liz, how can you effectively communicate, or how can leaders effectively communicate the mission and the vision and the values of their company to their employees?
So I think it's really important to kind of not overcomplicate this, and maybe kind of go back to something that we all probably love, is storytelling. Everybody's got a great story to tell. So that's around kind of bringing your team on board with a great story, and how you kind of sort of package that up. And that is also within that making it tangible, making it repeatable. So just because you might have said that in an annual company update doesn't mean that that's going to land exactly how you said that with the team. So we use lots of different channels to kind of repeat. So that might be a Monday team meeting, it might be our Wednesday social lunch. We have an intranet that's our newsletter. We have quarterly updates. We have one-to-ones with mentors. So you're using all of your touch points to communicate and get that across, which is really important, because not kind of one action is going to kind of hit where you want, and certainly not doing that annually. So it's about kind of frequency and sort of repetition. And I think it's really important to keep that as a two-way conversation rather than this is just how it is. So using things like your employee forums, making that kind of relevant. So we have a next gen employee forum for people within our business that have got under 4 years experience. They have different questions. They have different asks, maybe to some of the senior team. So it's always around sort of keeping that in context with your lots of different touch points.
I love that. Great ideas. And very important too, because I agree 100% with what you said. Sometimes it doesn't always land the way we think it's going to land. And that's part of the reason why I'm asking the question of all the guests this year, is to help all of our listeners and viewers really capture this idea that you may think you have communicated it effectively, but until you get that two-way communication that you were talking about, Liz, we're not sure that it's landed and being understood in the way that we intended it to be. And that's why it's so important to communicate those things. So I love that you're doing that. Really important. So that's a good note for all of our viewers and listeners here, is to make sure that you're communicating effectively using some of the tips that Liz just talked about. So really good. All right. Last question, our fun question here to wrap up the podcast. Tell us a little bit about your first job, Liz.
Okay. So my first job started when I was 15 in a tea shop, which is sort of like a cafe that sells tea and cakes and cream teas. And I was given the responsibility of doing that. It only had about 4 or 5 tables, but my boss let me get on with that. And I loved serving customers. And I think kind of what I've always taken from sort of that job, above and beyond always enjoying tea and cake, is the importance of always talking to your customers. And you can do that whether you're a 15-year-old sort of asking them, kind of what they want and what they enjoy in a tea shop, to running a PR and comms business like we do. It's customer engagement has always been really important. So that's my memories of my first job.
I love it. And I love that you were able to take some lessons that you learned from that first job, and that you've extended it all the way through your current entrepreneurial efforts of connecting in that word customer engagement. I really like that. Love that. I'm a big believer that entrepreneurs and business owners are more successful if one of their very first jobs was in the service industry. If they learned how to serve and do that, it seems to correlate really well. Do you agree? It sounds like.
I think that's a great point, because you're kind of, from that word, kind of looking at what you're doing to kind of keep that customer happy. And there's no other industry that does that better really than the leisure industry or sort of hospitality sort of sector. So yeah, great point.
Yep. Agreed completely. All right. Well, Liz, thank you again for taking time to be on the podcast today. How can people find you?
So they can find us, certainly the podcast that I mentioned before is called Thoughtful Leadership. That is across all of your usual sort of podcast channels, or you can find us online at ambitiouspr.co.uk or through Lis Anderson on LinkedIn. My profile's there, so love to connect. Can answer any questions there.
Fantastic. Well, thank you again. And thanks to all of you who are joining us each week to learn a little bit more about leaders and teams and engagement and all these fun things that help the world go around a little bit better. Thanks so much for joining us, everybody. Have a great day. This is Sean Richards with the Team Engagement Podcast, where leaders of teams share their insights. For more ideas, go to teamengagementpodcast.com. We also invite you to follow or subscribe to our podcast wherever you may be listening or watching. Is your business thriving? Go to tbs-score.com to find out. Thanks for joining us today. Have a great day.